Hello and welcome to the Chthonia Monday live stream. I'm Breachberg, and it is noon Eastern Standard Time, at least where I am. And so we're going to do our weekly Monday live stream. Today is actually kind of a day off for me, and I do actually have a pretty severe headache right now. You know, this happens to me sometimes. Not necessarily on Mondays. It just seems to come at random times. Doesn't seem to be connected to anything that I do in terms of like food or sleep or anything else. It just seems like no matter what, whether I've been super healthy and on top of everything or whether I've been doing things like crap, it seems to me like I get the headaches regardless. So, and they do seem to be connected to, I don't know, some kind of weird cycle that goes on in my body that hasn't gone on in the past. Well, I don't know. That's actually not true. It's probably a continuation of a cycle that started since my 40s. And it's just, while I get rid of certain problems, other ones crop up. So, in any case, no need to belabor that. But if I'm a little tired and a little fishing a little bit more for words, then you know why. So, okay. So, as always on this live stream, I like to start with some updates and talk about what's new. Now, I'm going to start with I'll call them the lesser updates, and I'll get to the bigger one after that as more people join in. First, I'll talk about Chthonia books. As I've mentioned, the latest release from Chthonia books was The Cunning Person's Poetry Apothecary by Ellen Jones. She goes by Miriam Ellen Jones, but we call her Ellen. And she said the copies look good. She had gotten some in the UK, and she actually should have gotten a shipment today of a bunch of author copies for her to sell. So, so that's certainly something that's worth checking out. Probably something that's worth promoting around the Halloween season. A lot of my other books as well. I've had reasons that they've been, certain contexts that they've been coming up. The live streams I do every day over on my other page, Transition Life Coaching. Some of the subjects that have come up, or some of the narratives, are things that are expressed in some of the novels that I have. So obviously the first book I ever put out on this was Archetype Possession. That's the first book that I put out, and that one is out through Amazon only. It's a Amazon Kindle thing, which actually in terms of presentation I think is sometimes a little bit better than Ingram. But the problem is then I'm locked into Amazon. You can't get those books anywhere else. So people who hate Amazon, I can't order it through their local bookstore or something. All of my other books you can order that way. And so there's Maeve, there's Morrigan Timelines, there is the one that came out after that. There was Project Lethe, there was Regenerator, and I feel like I'm missing one somewhere in there. But I've got quite a number of books out on Chthonia books. I haven't been doing a whole lot of plugging of those lately because I have so many irons in the fire, and it's like when you pretty much can dedicate your focus to really only one thing well at a time. So I have been kind of divided a little bit on that. And I feel like there's a certain amount of Chthonia that maybe I've been neglecting a little bit. Maybe not totally neglecting, but where I'm doing more maintenance than new stuff. We did have a new podcast out this week on Nick Nevin, which is sometimes referred to as the Scottish Hecate. And I'm going to talk a little bit about her towards the end, I think, just to at least touch on that a little bit. Obviously, listen to the podcast because we kind of go over what all of the possibilities are for Nick Nevin and who she might be, given that the first mention of her is from the 16th century. It's like the late 1580s is the first time. And she's mentioned actually only in a literary context. We don't see Nick Nevin mentioned necessarily in any other kind of mythical or folkloric context. A bit like Yeats's Lenin She. The Lenin She is often referred to as being some kind of a fairy figure who is like some kind of ancient fairy figure. But really, it seems to be more of an invention of W.B. Yeats. Similarly, Nick Nevin as a name might be an invention of Alexander Montgomery, but we explore that more in the podcast, so that's something certainly we can look at. I think one of the most interesting things about Nick Nevin is the way in which she kind of she's like all the tropes, you know. She's a witch queen, she's a fairy queen, she's the Scottish Hecate, she's she's a hag, she can morph into a beautiful woman, it's like she's every dark feminine trope in one figure. And it's not really clear. There are people who, from what I could see, actually worship Nick Nevin. And I mean, I don't really, you know, if that's a name for a particular type of energy that you're connecting with, there's no reason not to do that. Whether she has any kind of real ancient history, I mean, I don't think so. There's a lot of theories. She could have been that could have actually been the name of a witch that's just been kind of used as a catch-all term for certain witch figures or witch queens, and of course the line between witches and fairies and all that seems kind of blurred in the literature. So in any case, that's something I talk about this week. I wanted to talk a little bit these are all just extraordinarily brief updates here. YouTube and Spreaker, the ads are really getting kind of out of control on both of them. Now, in Spreaker, I have to look to see what I can do. I don't want to demonetize them altogether because this is an income stream that I have. It's not a huge income stream, but it is an income stream. Oh, and good afternoon. I'm glad you could join me. But the ads, like I was watching YouTube stuff before, and literally you have to sit through an 8-minute video, and like a minute and a half in, there's a full minute of ads that you can't skip. And that's the new thing that they're doing now. There's some where there's still only the 5 seconds and you can skip. A lot of them, they're doing it that way now. Because, you know, Google's not making enough money off of ads, apparently. So happy to finally catch a live. Yes, I'm so glad you could finally join me. I've seen your stuff posted, but I haven't heard from you in some time, so I'm really glad to see that you're here. So I'm really getting annoyed with the ads. Now, what I've started doing with the Chthonia YouTube stuff, oh, hey, Dave, nice for you to join me, is that I have now, there's actually a setting in the monetization, which I don't know if a lot of people see it. Sometimes YouTube hides it on you. It's the monetization setting. And what that is called is it's basically, you know, you uncheck the mid-roll button. And I've had cases where I've uploaded videos and it's like, oh, we'll give you the option to do that after your video's gone through checking. So people sometimes when they're uploading, they don't bother to go back and undo that step. I always go back because now it's like, okay, you can have ads at the beginning and at the end, and the middle I want to be ad free. I want to do the same thing on Spreaker because the ads on Spreaker, from the feedback I'm getting, and I've been getting over it, are getting to be exceptionally annoying. Like the fact that this is a podcast that kind of falls in the era of what they call philosophy, means that I get like these religious universities and stuff. Like they have no way of distinguishing. And Spreaker has told me, oh yeah, well you can fix that and choose the kind of ads, but you have to pay like the $2,000 a year rate. And I'm like, you know where you can go stick that. I don't make $2,000 a year in revenue on this place. So yeah, so it's, but there is some way that you can do some kind of manual manipulation. So I want to see if I can do that on Spreaker too, where we just have the MIDI at the beginning, at the end. Now I lose some revenue doing that, but I honestly don't care because it's not my main income stream. I'm just like, you know what? The annoyance factor will drive people away, and I don't really need to be dealing with that. So people who have been annoyed with the ads, who have written to me about how freaking annoying the ads are, I feel your pain. And I am going to try to fix that in both of those venues. The remasters. Okay, so this is an odd thing. I put up the Lilith remaster this week, thanks to Jesse Pollock, who had helped me with the cleanup on the sound. Now, one of the reasons I had enlisted Jesse was because I had to strip the audio from the original Camtasia videos that were posted on YouTube, and when I went through my 2019 files, which is where most of the deleted episodes were from, all I could find were the MP4s, and I'm like, oh man, I have to not only get rid of the vocal tics and stuff that are annoying in these, but I also have to clean up the tinniness of the sound to make it sound decent, you know, so that you can listen to it. And so what ends up happening is that I went back through my files because Jesse and I were kind of like, he's like, okay, we'll split the cost of I forget what the heck it's called, it begins with a D. It's a particular kind of software. He's an expert in it. He's like, look, you could subscribe to this software yourself? He says, or I've already got it. Like, why don't we just split the monthly cost and you can, just send me. It's not very expensive per month, but I said, okay, that would be that would be fair, because I wasn't going to ask him to do all that stuff for free. And so we were going to do that. I was going to send him 2 files per week, and then I went and looked. I'm like, I have all the MP3s. It's like they all reappeared. When I went in there, I'm like, wait a minute, I have the MP3 of Medusa, I have the MP3 of Hecate, why did I think did not have these? So I have no idea. I don't know if that's some weird, fairy trick or something. I have no idea. But in any case, hopefully I'm going to be able to work more of these in now and get more than I hoped, actually, up by the end of the month, or at least within the next month. So that would be really good. It'd be a good thing for the fall season too, to have all those up. So more of the remasters coming. And Patreon. The only thing I was going to mention was that I feel like I feel like one way I am falling down is some of the Patreon extras that are not something I always do, but I try to give an extra episode like on the off weeks, and I've not had the time to do that. So my apologies to patrons. I want to get back on the horn with doing that. But I'm also kind of at this point where I'm like, I've had so much going on. I had 6 videos to record yesterday. I gave a class last night. I was supposed to have a client in the afternoon. She ended up book bumping till next week, which kind of worked out because I just had so much going on. And I've been, I had an episode, the university where I teach, what it is you get paid per contract per class that you teach. And you're only allowed 2 classes, and I'm teaching 2. And one department put my contract through. I signed these contracts in July and early August, and one of my department chairs, a friend of mine actually, somebody who I like very, very much, I don't know how she dropped the ball, but it seemed very unintentional, or but it turns out she didn't put any of the adjunct contracts in, so I only got paid for 1 class. I got half the pay I was expecting, and I had a few choice words for that. I'm not trying not to blame her, because I know that for some reason, nothing that Montclair puts together is intuitive. Like, all of the stuff that you have to submit. Like, I know when I had to change insurances, it was like you got to a point, and then apparently you had to go back in like you were starting new to delete the old. Like, it was like some really weird thing. And I'm like, why is this like this? Like, because I couldn't understand why it wasn't going through. And they're like, oh no, you've got these other 5 steps to do. I'm like, well, it'd be nice if it said somewhere that I have these other 5 steps to do, because I'm not technology deficient here. So anyway, so that was so it's been a bit of a frustrating week with that kind of stuff, but we'll get there. Everything we'll figure everything out. And the last thing I'm going to talk about before I get into the actual subject of what I was going to discuss today is the school, the Institute for the Study of Feminine Myth. I'm going to probably post some more about it. There's 2 more weeks to register, basically, before classes start. So if anybody wants to register, unless people want to register for audits, the full term and even the full term discounts are going to be going away, because we're probably in the last section where I can offer the 2 payment option. Part of this is just because I haven't had enough leeway to put this stuff together. I was kind of getting all this together at the beginning of August, trying to get everybody's schedules together. And I am kind of hoping, right now this is not planned, but I am hoping to talk to some of the other professors and see if we can't do like a YouTube live stream where we can talk about the class and talk about things that they're going to teach and stuff like that, just to give people an idea of who the faculty are. I mean, I did do the kind of daily posts of the 4 of us, and I also I'm going to be putting up some more stuff this week about the classes and the class content, and kind of a little bit of an FAQ on what the school requirements are and stuff, because I mean, I don't know if some people are put off thinking, oh, I'm going to be graded on stuff, because people are not being graded. This is just an opportunity to learn stuff and then participate in discussion about it and think about it, and then have some kind of creative output with it. One of the reasons I'm doing the creative output piece is because, I mean, a lot of times, yeah, you can walk away with the certificate, but the whole point is not just to sit there, listen to somebody, and then walk away with the certificate. The idea is that you want to engage with the material in some way. And again, the creative project, the field's open as to what people want to do. They don't have to write a paper necessarily or anything like that. And even that's not going to be graded. It's just you're going to have somebody else who might be able to give you some suggestions, somebody else who has the expertise, so that you can walk away not only with a certificate that you can put on something, we were talking about people in counseling and so forth, they can put on their resumes and so forth. and even other things. I mean, there's other fields, teachers and things where this might actually be a useful thing to have, a useful kind of certification, and also, have some kind of creative work at which people may or may not do something with. I mean, people, you don't have to. We always feel like we always have to do something with the stuff that we do. Like, I'm working on another novel right now. I feel like this is what happens to me. I'm in the middle of 10 million things, and it's like all of a sudden I get this like inspirational kind of dump where it's like, okay, time to start writing something. And I'm like, I don't have time to be writing this right now. But nonetheless, I have been doing that. So, yeah. So, in case, I'm trying to make the school my focus right now, which is why some other things have been kind of off on the periphery. But yeah, so definitely if that's something you're interested in, check it out over the next couple of weeks. Because also I know, because it is, like I said, it is a full semester, plus it's a project, plus you're getting mentored, plus, so that's what the whole cost is for. And that's kind of the minimum cost that I could do. I was going to try to keep it lower than that, but that's kind of where I'm at. And I still need to put together some Patreon discounts, which will be good. Like Patreon members, it'll be kind of through, they'll have a little bit more time with things because they've already been paying and they've already been supporting the work. So I'm going to try to have something like that. And there's also still a GoFundMe if you want to donate. That's still up and that's live. Sometimes people are like, oh, okay, I can't do it this semester, but I'd like to support the project. The GoFundMe is up there. The links are currently in my bio here on Chthonia. I actually have several links that are posted. I have links to the website, my merch shop, my Patreon, and also to the school. Because the GoFundMe link actually has a video where I go through and I explain all the back details of the school, and we talk about the objectives and what we're trying to get to and the goals. Like, there's a whole video that I put on YouTube, and it's also on the YouTube channel. So you can watch all of these things there if you want to. And then, and then the GoFundMe. And again, there's no minimum amount or anything. I really would have preferred to do Kickstarter, where I could have given rewards, like saying, okay, X number, oh, hey, Samara. Where you could, okay, there's going to be so many free classes or this or that, but I can't. Kickstarter's for products. It's not for things like this. So I had to go with GoFundMe instead. So, but with GoFundMe, there's no limits. People can donate anything, $1, they can donate $200. It's completely up to you. So it's just, so yeah. So anyway, just those things are all still viable. I'm going to be posting more about it this week. But I am a tired individual right now. So anyway, yeah, but I want to make sure that I'm trying to keep on top of all of that stuff. I'm trying to keep on top of a lot of things right now. I had 6 videos to produce for my other channel yesterday. Cause I do bi-weekly tarot videos and stuff, which I don't know. See, the people who watch them are like, no, you have to put these up. I need these every week. And part of me is like, yeah, but like, yes, exhausted. I have like 10 people who watch them. So I'm like, okay, that could change, but I'm like, that's a lot of work for just a handful of people. I don't know. Anyway. So we'll see. And of course I'm doing all my other client work too, which is still open and ongoing, which transitionlifecoaching.net. You can check that out, what I'm doing over there. Okay. So I've talked an awful lot about Chthonia. Well, this is the Chthonia live stream, right? But I've talked a lot about that stuff. So let me jump into what today's topic was. Because this is interesting, because now when I teach mythology, when I teach it in person, which I haven't done in a while, but the in-person class, I will always have a kind of interactive first session where I will have a bunch of slides with just photos on them. And I'll ask my students, I'll show the photos and we'll look at different things. We'll say, okay, here's this particular symbol. Like when you see this, what does this mean to you? And the point of it, I mean, it could be everything. It could be like, the airplane mode thing on your phone. It could be the battery thing. It could be like all these things. People go, oh yeah, that means this. That means that, just like we know, like a stop sign we know means stop, even if we just saw that kind of red octagonal shape, we would know, oh, okay, that means I'm supposed to stop, right? We have ways of knowing things. There's kind of these universal signs and symbols that we use for things. Now, when I go through this exercise, at the end, I'll put up some other pictures. So one of the things I will put up is I will put pictures of people who are dressed, some who are dressed in white and some who are dressed in black. And I'll say, okay, well, if this is in a movie, tell me who the hero is and tell me who the villain is. And 2 seconds, oh yeah, the guy in white's the hero and the guy in black is the villain, right? And so we start going through some more and more of these images, and I'm like, yeah, so, and you have to think about, because the whole point of this is kind of let you think, there's certain things that you have automatic associations with. So when I talk to people about narratives, about having a narrative, and narrative is a word that some people hate. They tell me they hate that word. But story sometimes to people, again, has kind of a different inference. Sometimes a story is just like a thing you made up. Oh, you made up the story. But we all have a story, right? Stories they're part of being human, actually. Everything we do has a story. We have some or if you like philosophy, some kind of a priori belief for what it is that you're doing. Well, of course, this is the way we do things because, right? There's always a narrative about everything. There's an association with everything. The decisions we make, knee-jerk, may just be on the visuals of things. I mean, this is how advertising and stuff works, right? I mean, visuals tell you a lot of things, and people will make a judgment about you based on appearance, whether they should or not. Frequently, those judgments are, a lot of times they're incorrect, because people will just make certain decisions about somebody and how they are. It's funny, being a 52-year-old woman, like with this hair and these tattoos, there's certain inferences that people think they can draw about me, which are completely incorrect. But just as a way of an example here. But what I think one of the interesting things about this is when it comes to ideas of dark and light. Okay, and you could talk about this across a spectrum of things. If you talk about it religiously, you might think about it in terms of God, heaven, angels versus devils and demons and things like that. People might think of dark and light in that way. Or they might just think, or we talk about something being in darkness. We talk about dark ages, right? And what are dark ages? Dark ages are when we don't have literacy, when things seem to be more in chaos, when there's more, when there seems to be more corruption, more things where people don't behave in ways that we think of as being enlightened, rational, and human, right? That somehow some of our human achievement is lost in those kinds of time periods. Now, of course, as you know, this podcast is the podcast of the dark feminine. And it's really funny how many spaces I go into where I'm hired to work in person, as a contractor, where I come in and I'll do certain sessions, Reiki, Rahani, whatever else I'm doing. And it's interesting how people have I've heard so many times in those spaces, oh, well, everybody here is a light worker. I'm like, not me. I'm a dark worker. And I've done a whole live stream on this. So I'm not going to repeat me as dark worker. I'm not going to regurgitate that old content. But what's really interesting to me is the way in which that can be construed. I mean, we could talk about the whole racial narrative too, and the way that people automatically see. I mean, again, these are automatic associations. This is not, and again, it doesn't necessarily mean that we see people who are of a different skin color and automatically assume something about them. Some people do, especially some of the older generations do. But it can also just be automatic assumptions about things. For example, people might assume that people who are darker skinned perhaps are in more poverty or have more, and that isn't true. That just isn't true. It's not that's not the way the dynamics work. But people make automatic assumptions. And it's not just in the United States that they do this. One of the eye-opening things that I had when I went a lot more to Hindu ceremonies and to satsangs and to things like that. And of course I knew a whole lot of people, and we would go to temple together and stuff and things like that. And I remember having a conversation with my friend's husband's daughter from his first marriage. She lived in Dubai. And she kept saying to me, oh, you've got to come to Dubai and visit me. And I thought, well, I've never really felt any kind of draw to the Arabian countries, because I've always kind of felt like, I don't know, as a single female, I just don't feel like culturally that she says, oh no, she says, you're a white American, no problem, you'll get a job. They just don't want anything to do with those dark-skinned natives. And my face just kind of went, excuse me? I mean, and I've seen examples of this in India too, where darker skinned Indians are discriminated against via lighter skinned Indians, for instance. I've seen these kind of things go on, and some of that's very colonial. It's the that British colonialism in particular, the idea that the white person rules, right? And then there's people who say, oh no, that narrative doesn't exist. I'm like, oh yeah, it does. And the thing is, there's kind of the proof of it, because we still have this association with darkness. I had done an article when I was working on my doctoral dissertation from a doctor who was actually it was a psychiatrist, and he was quite astonished by like darker skinned Mexican women or things like that who would come into his office and literally like hate themselves and think that there's something wrong with them because their skin was so dark, like they were cursed in some way. And he's like, why would you think that? So he actually started to do this. He did this whole long survey about dark and light, which is pretty fascinating to look at. I mean, it is kind of a broad-based survey, but he looks at a lot of these different associations and he's like, is this really this embedded in the culture? And the answer is, yeah, it is. So when I talk about darkness, it's funny, when I started working up at the store I work at in Milford, I remember Corinna, who's the store owner, she's a lovely person, really, really sweet. And she said to me, the first time I met you and you were talking about the kind of work you did, because I was actually kind of scared. Like, a lot of people are literally scared by that term. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not, when I talk about dark work, I'm just saying, to me, darkness, just like the word occult, okay? Because the word occult also implies darkness. To call something occult is from the Latin word that has to do with what is hidden, what's not obvious, what's hidden, what's mysterious, what's hidden. So an occultist is somebody who wants to uncover what's hidden. Sometimes I'll use it interchangeably with esotericist, somebody who's interested in, again, the hidden facts of things, or the hidden traits behind things. And this usually means, well, certainly through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, and even before, the occultist was somebody who practiced magic of some kind, because magic and science were really quite similar at one point. And there, and you would see these interchangeability between, like the alchemists and so forth, who probably set the stage for modern medicine and modern chemistry and things like that. And people who dealt with astronomy, who also dealt with astrology. You have all of these things that are about trying to decode what goes on in the universe, right? And or trying to understand what's beyond our human communities, what's beyond the visible, how do we interact with the other consciousness of what's around us. So when I talk about doing dark work, I'm saying, yeah, what we're doing is, because those are the things that get you. It's like a lot of people who do what I do, like in coaching and so forth. I mean, coaches are really supposed to be there. It's almost like we're sort of like, low rent therapists. You're kind of there to you're dealing with people in their spiritual paths, but you're not supposed to be there to tell them what path to be on. It's more there to kind of listen and to support and to help support them in whatever their goals are. Like my role as a coach is not to tell somebody, oh well, this is the way, you're wrong, you have to believe this. Like, that's not my job. My job isn't it doesn't matter what I think of what they believe, but certainly to suggest that they might want to look at certain things. And when we deal with what's dark, something came up the other day. I did a podcast called Inside the Sacred Circle with Joanne and Jim, and Joanne usually on my other podcast every morning, or my live stream every morning. And one of the things that came up in that had to do with the idea of dark and light as it related to witch communities and certain occult communities. Because as you imagine, the conception there is a little bit different. Now, I thought about kind of this a little bit historically, because I got involved with this kind of stuff from a fairly young age. I would say that, when I say witchcraft, I don't mean like, Halloween, witches on broomsticks stuff. I mean like, like the kinds of tropes that we have about it that are really fictionalized. I'm talking about like Wicca and things like that, which back in the mid-1980s, it's not that nobody had heard of it, but it was not something that was really, there were books in the library I could get about it, which is where I learned about it. Hey, yay, go into the library to find stuff. I found Doreen Valiente's book, I found Starhawk's book, I found Margot Adler's Drawing Down the Moon, I found all of these books on this, and of course this was the direction I was kind of being drawn into at that time as a good Catholic girl. And what I found was that a lot of the rhetoric at that time, even in the publications and stuff that existed, Never mind the kind of lack of scholarship for a lot of this, but that's a separate topic. I found that when we came to the dark and light conversation, you saw people trying to differentiate themselves. Well, it was like Glinda in The Wizard of Oz. Are you a good witch? Or are you a bad witch? Are you a dark witch? Or are you a light witch? Are you a white witch or a dark witch? Right? White witchcraft or black witchcraft. And of course, over the years of learning about those kinds of practices, whether it be witchcraft or whether it be some other variety of occultism, the idea that something is dark or light is it's really a non-idea. I mean, it is what it is. It's like anything. If you use fire to cook your food, or do you use it to burn down somebody's house? Is that we calling that white fire or black fire? Like it's fire. It's just, what are you doing with it? It doesn't have anything to do with one thing or the other specifically. But it becomes very interesting, because when you apply this to modern paganism, and I think some of the discussion was, so if you have people who are interested in, say, dark goddesses, like we talk about on this channel, then there's the assumption there that, ooh, yeah, you're into dark magic, you're into the underworld, you're into necromancy, you're into all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, I'm interested in that stuff in as much as it's, first of all, as it's relates to its connection to nature. When we talk about the Chthonia, Chthonia is just a fancy word for related to the earth and under the earth, right? It's just, there's the idea that dealing in the underworld, because again, associations, dealing in the underworld, dealing in the world under is dealing with hell, right? That's what people think. Oh, it's hell. Heaven versus hell. Heaven's up there, hell's down there. Something that started probably with Plato and the Greek philosophers, trying to differentiate between those rational, enlightened people who will be rewarded and the rest of you who are just going to go down to Tartarus and be tormented by the Furies, who now all of a sudden had that job, which was never their job exactly before. They didn't drag people to Tartarus and torture them like demons. That was not what they were there for. But we have this. So you have this idea of dark and light that comes in, and of course, like people who have the goth aesthetic or something. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, all this. It's spooky and dark and and death oriented and stuff. Like almost like it's like it's a type of an evil aesthetic, right? And the thing is, it's like, yeah, but the reality is it's not really about any of that at all. Yeah, you can have that aesthetic. That aesthetic's pretty cool. I embraced the goth aesthetic like probably 30 years ago. I have nothing against it. And actually, though, if you meet most goth people, they're actually pretty nice people. They're pretty sweet people, a lot of them. So it's not even like they're wicked and evil. I think it was like the whole thing about the black metal bands and stuff, when people were just like, there was one guy who was the head of this really scary looking, they were all like acting devil worshippers and stuff like that. And I think Alice Cooper said, yeah, I met this guy, and he's just like, oh, hi, Mr. Cooper, like, I'm here with my mom. Like, it was like, they're not always as Jake Stratton Kent would have said, not as ooky spooky as they appear to be. But I found when I was talking with Joanna about some of this stuff having to do with the way that, and she's not the only one. I think it was Karen who also runs the Divine Feminine app. There's a lot of concern. There's a lot of people. This has always been an issue in modern witchcraft. Modern witchcraft, first of all, by the way, is modern. Okay, it's not. There's like, people like to talk about traditions. Like, I'm from an ancient lineage of witches, and I'm like, I have reason to question those claims. I might question those claims a little less in parts of England, but it's not like. It might be like your grandmother might have taught you some, divinations or skills. Whether that means you have a lineage as a witch or not is, it may be a matter of semantics. I don't know. But a lot of these groups, because that's what they were talking about, whether or not one must take initiation in a modern witch group to be able to consider themselves that way. And the thing is, like I said, there's probably pros and cons, because I think initiatory systems do have an ability to create a transformation in you. But there's also a lot of coven work and thing that's a little bit too a little bit too lightweight for an initiation. Initiation carries some gravity towards it. There's an ordeal involved in it. And a lot of times there's not an ordeal. It's more like people making, like, okay, if I'm going to go with Catholicism, like people making their confirmation, right? It's just, nothing happens to you there. You go to a mass, you say a bunch of stuff, the bishop asks you a bunch of stuff, and then that's it, and then you have a party. Okay, nothing happens to you necessarily. Carl Jung had complained about this, actually, in his Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, which is kind of an autobiography of his. I think it's kind of pieces that were put together. But he had talked about because he was somebody who was really into the idea of transformation and stuff, even from a young age. I mean, which should surprise no one. But when he was going to make his confirmation, I think it was in the Lutheran community, and he was expecting this big experience, and he was just like, and he said, when I went, and it was just this little dry formulaic thing, and they kind of give you a little slap or whatever. He said, I was so utterly disappointed. I was so utterly disappointed because I expected so much more from this, right? Moving into the darkness means moving into a space of transformation, and we've taken all of that out because we don't want to be scary with anybody, right? And it doesn't mean it has to be scary. It just means it's a challenge that you face. It doesn't mean it has to be a scary challenge. But okay, so we initially start witchcraft with this idea of dark versus light. Are you awake? And in Ireland, I actually see this as well. I've seen where people have had to refer themselves as a white witch, and having met the person in question, who is sometimes on this live stream, she's also really great. I had a reading with her when down in Scaries, where she lives, and just from being with her, I'm like, yeah, she understands that there's none of this dark light stuff. I mean, she gets that, but she's living in Ireland, which still has a very strongly Catholic backdrop. Like, I noticed any stores that you might consider to be metaphysical by some stripe always had to be referred to as angel stores. Okay. Like, you had to talk about angels. If you were talking about angels, it was like somehow acceptable. If you talked about anything else, then it wasn't kosher. So she refers to herself as a white witch, and in the cultural context, I understand totally why she does that. But again, strictly speaking, there's not that differentiation. And then people start distinguishing between, like, well, we're not devil worshippers. Just like none of them are connected to Aleister Crowley, who's obviously a devil worshipper at least in the parlance that I had heard originally. And I was like, of course, the more you research that, you're like, yeah, actually, Gerald Gardner, who's the founder of modern witchcraft, got his 3 degrees, Man of Earth degrees from Crowley and the OTO. There's totally a connection with Crowley. Which, by the way, is not a bad thing either, because Crowley's also not Satan incarnate, in spite of his liking to call himself the Great Beast 666. Anybody who knows about the Thelemic system knows that 666 is a solar number. It has to do with the sun. And in the very complicated way that means. But, so it's not, so you're not, yeah, so yeah, he was somebody, he didn't differentiate. He didn't differentiate. It was just kind of like, okay, here are the systems, here's the knowledge, let's experiment with this. What did he call it? Let's see, the method of science and the aim of religion, I think, was the way that he would describe it. So, okay, so one of the ways that this manifests, there's two different manifestations of this that I want to talk about. One is the way in a lot of witchcraft communities, from what I've seen and what I've heard, okay, because I've kind of avoided coven work, probably for this reason, even since the 90s, because there's a kind of drama that tends to come in, even to these small groups, that is probably not necessary. I mean, I'm sure there's some groups out there that are, functional insane and all that kind of stuff, and that do great work. So I'm not trying to say, all of them, but there are some people in the community who tend to have this gatekeeping or dogmatic way of doing things. Like, no, if you're going to do this, you must do this. This is the right way. If you do that, that's the wrong way. And I'm like, because that's not the traditional way, and you didn't get initiated and learn the traditional way. And I'm like, initiated into what? Something that's been around since the 1950s? And again, Jake Stratton-Kent, when he was alive, did definitely make the case that, listen, just because something's modern, a reworking of maybe something that was much older doesn't make it bad. But sometimes you do need a whole fresh approach and a new way to look at something. But But that doesn't. But the people who try to claim, oh no, I can trace myself all the way back to the Stone Age. Well, I'm dubious of that. Let's put it that way. I'm dubious of that claim for anybody. And again, believe what you want, but I'm dubious of that. A lot of people, there's a lot of different facets of what we think of as magical that people will tap into, or goddess worship. And there's also a lot of bad information about that. That was a big thing, like in the 90s. I think Gnosis magazine had done a piece on this in the mid-90s, where, and the author was basically calling people out on bad scholarship about witchcraft. They're like, you're putting in stuff that's just absolute bullshit. It's just not true. And that really doesn't give the actual religion a whole lot of credibility when everything about it is like a fairy tale or a fantasy. I mean, like I said, you can believe whatever beliefs you have, whatever rituals you have, whatever way you're connecting is fine. But when you try to go back and say, oh, well, like ancient witchcraft in England, bringing pumpkins into Halloween. I'm like, no, they didn't use pumpkins. They didn't have pumpkins. Like just little, even stuff like that. There's just things that they become a romanticized version of that. When in Phantom Queen, a book that I still don't know when it's coming out, since Theon hasn't really put anything out this year, but I'm not going to get into that. That's one of the things like we talk about, is the idea that there is this, when we talk about Celtic religion, there's this fantasy notion of what Celtic religion is. And it's so when somebody writes a book on, say, Celtic witchcraft, you have to be very careful, because what they're writing about is something very, very modern. And some people are tempted to say, oh yeah, this is the way they did it in the old days. You don't know how it was done. That was the whole point. People were asking me, oh, tell me about ancient Morrigan ritual. I'm like, nobody knows what the heck that was. Probably involves skinning somebody alive. I mean, just judging from what we saw in Britain, like comparable cults in Britain, I mean, we don't know. We don't know what's involved with that. But, and we can't even necessarily guess from the literature. That's the problem. You're talking about traditions that were largely oral. But it's interesting how many people want to play gatekeepers about what is right and what is wrong and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Now, your response to me might be like, well, yeah, Bridge, but, there's got to be some kind of a structure. There's got to be some kind of limits. Of course there's a structure. But as it was pointed out to me very early in my days of learning about this, was they said, you don't need a fancy thing. If you're going to go out and do natural magic, you can just have something to represent each of the elements. You could have a matchstick to represent fire. You could have a feather to represent air. You could just take a penny to represent pentacles. You could have, and then you could just, you could have a bottle of water to represent water. I mean, you could do that like if you were in the middle of nowhere with nothing, right? You could still do ritual with that. You could still figure out a way to do something with that. There's basic ideas and techniques that once you do that, there's no hard and fast rule about, well, it must be done, wearing this color on this day and whatever. I mean, when it comes to certain rituals, a lot of times, some of that stuff, that stuff could be fine. That could enhance something that you're doing. Is it always necessary? No. And I'm saying that from experience. No, it's not always necessary to have all that stuff. You work with what you have. I think that was kind of the idea behind hedge witchery. You work with what you have. You're not trying to, we're not, trying to make some big fancy elaborate setup. That may look cool, but that's a fashion statement. It's not essential to what you're doing. So anyway, there's a lot of people who try to gatekeep about what is the proper way to do things. And the problem with a lot of this gatekeeping and the way that it's done, and also the way in which one declares themselves like a priestess of this goddess, or I'm a high priestess of this one or that one. And again, I mean, if you belong to a group, that might well be your title. But my whole thing about all of that is that the problem is people are practicing what's paganism, what we would think of as paganism, but via a Christian template. And I'm going to say Christian. Okay, even though there are three big monotheisms, there's Judaism, there's Christianity, and there's Islam, and maybe there's different elements of those mixed in as well, a lot of what people are doing is templating this kind of, the kind of that kind of context that you're coming from, that biblical context, and they're templating what they've learned about religion growing up onto a very ancient religion. So, and this gets into the whole problem of because there are religious scholars. I have read articles, and I've had my students read articles about, especially in my Trojan War class, there was an article about somebody in one of the religious journals who was talking about the relationship of the generals in the Trojan War to their gods. And the way he decided this had to be some kind of fictional compact because he couldn't see how any of this was religion. And that's when we get into these problems of religion versus magic. Is it, like oh, one's an outgrowth of the other, one's an evolution of the other, which is nonsense. It's not. The whole evolutionary idea in religion is just BS, and it was probably thrown out somewhere around mid to late 20th century. It was thrown out, and but ancient paganism isn't practiced like you going to church. It's not the same thing. It's not the same type of ritual. That the relationship between, and also when you're talking about a relationship with somebody who believes in one God, okay, that's not the ancient relationship. The ancient people have a relationship with their gods. These are their local deities, and these are the deities that they work with to survive, in the same way that they would go to vendors in the marketplace and buy their stuff. I mean, they work with their deities. It's like, okay, I need this, so I'm gonna appeal to this god, and this is what I'm gonna give him or her as payment for this, for them to do this thing for me. This is where we get into the idea of pacts, right? Which later, of course, was changed into the demonic pact. Oh, you're making a pact with the devil and selling your soul and all this stuff, and it's not that. Pact making is just saying, okay, I'm agreeing to work with you, no matter what kind of spirit you are. It's just like with people. I mean, sometimes you work with people, you ideally want to work with people who are honest and upfront, but you might be working with people who are a little dodgy, depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And it's no different in the way you deal with your gods. I've had people who will say to me, if they have been in a witchcraft practice, let's just say they've been doing rituals to Hecate. Let's just say that. And then they feel drawn to work with a different deity, a different energy, and they say, I hope that other energy is not going to be offended. And I'm like, they don't care. They're not devoted to you. That's the other thing, too, about ancient religion. I always gave the story of Hippolytus as the example. There's a story of Hippolytus. He's the son of Theseus, and Theseus is married to Phaedra at this point. And Phaedra, Hippolytus is a devotee of Artemis, who is a virgin hunting goddess. And all the devotees of Artemis they're chaste. They don't have sex. And Hippolytus was actually very critical of people who believed in love, like, oh, love is so stupid and it's this and that. He had all these criticisms, which made the goddess of love, Aphrodite, pretty darn annoyed. So she punished him. The way she punishes is through either infidelity or sometimes things more insidious like incest. And what happened in this particular case was his stepmother tried to seduce him. And he rejected her, of course, very, very firmly and very soundly rejected her. And she turned around and told his father that he had assaulted her. And so the father had him dragged to his death. And then later on found out it was a lie. But that was Aphrodite's revenge. Now, Artemis is his patroness, right? So by the way that we think of it, they're like, well, Artemis loved him so. Why didn't she jump in and save him? That's what. Why didn't his patron goddess save him? And some people will say, oh, because she wasn't. She doesn't exist. It's like, no. The reason actually is because the way it would have looked if I'm going to get into the mind of Artemis, supposing she has a mind there, it's that because then later on Hippolytus has a whole cult devoted to him after his death. It's like that's kind of the way that they make up for it. It's like, oh, okay, well, people will be there to kind of worship you after your death as this kind of, like Artemis kind of makes them into some other kind of a figure, almost like a deity type figure. But what happens is, but it's because, Artemis, is saddened that her devotee has passed away, but he insulted Aphrodite, so, oh well, what are you going to do? He insulted Aphrodite. It's not like she was going to jump in and save him because, he did, it's just like, okay, that's not part of the deal. She's not there. Nobody's there to save you from anything. And devotion to your deity doesn't mean they're always going to jump in and take the bullet for you. That's not how it works. There's a back and forth. There's an expectation of a back and forth there. It's a relationship. It's not you asking for a bunch of stuff and just waiting to see what happens. So, I don't know. In any case, that's one aspect of it. This is the reason that sacrifice and things like that were so important, because the idea is that there's like a give and take, that the gods need you to provide things, and therefore, you have this kind of symbiotic relationship with each other. So modern forms of religion that seem to be in format a little bit more like what we might see in a churchy kind of environment, it's templating. It's basically you're taking the template of the more modern monotheisms and you're just laying it on top of paganism. Okay, so that's the thing number one when it comes to this kind of stuff. And this is part of the process that I think that people go through who initiate into these systems and again, I feel like this is always where people start too, but when you kind of gradually over time, you want to shed those layers that are not really essential to that. When you really start to get to the essence of what paganism is, or what the actual mode of worship or what the purpose is, you start to get away from a lot of this stuff. But people start with what they know. Okay, so people start with what they know. The thing is, and again, I don't think, there's some people who are very, very critical of people for doing that, and but we've all started there. Anybody who's done this is started there. And so you need to get to a point where you realize that that's not how it works. But that only happens through practice. There's not a whole lot of people, unless you can find the right teachers, there's not a whole lot of people who are going to teach you that. And it's a lot of times this is just stuff you have to go through on your own and experience and then go, oh yeah, maybe it doesn't work that way. Okay. The other thing I want to talk about with regard to this kind of gatekeeping dark light stuff, other than, we're trying to assume this kind of dogmatic knowledge of ancient stuff that nobody can lay claim to, really. I mean, the information we have is going to be fragmented. Anybody who's an anthropologist or an archaeologist will tell you that is the case. You go to any ancient site, they'll say, well, this was probably used for ritual, but we don't really know. There were two works. There's one of them, it was called, well, actually, there's two things that always come to mind with me. There's a children's book called The Villa of the Mysteries, which I think came out in 1979. And it's a picture book. And it is like the quintessential book about archaeology, really. Because it postulates this world, of course, this is written in the 70s, so like in the 1980s, where the whole world is like completely, there's so much junk mail that it completely overtakes everything. And so civilization dies, and then the next civilization comes in, and they're picking through all of this. And it's hilarious, because they're finding things, and they're like, oh, this must be their sacred ritual thing. Like, the funniest thing is when they go into a hotel, this Villa of the Mysteries, like it's like a regular hotel, and they find like the toilet seat on the toilet, and they're like, oh, this must have been the sacred vessel of the goddess, and then this must have been the sacred necklace that they wear, and they're taking the toilet seat off and putting it around their neck. I mean, it's funny, but that is kind of what we're doing with archaeology, and with anthropology. It's just we don't know. We're always assuming that there's some kind of magical or ritual purpose that there may or may not have been. The other thing I think of, there was something that was done on crack.com, and I think it's been taken down since then, which sucks because it was so good. It was a documentary about the Beatles from the year 3100. And it's so funny. It's like, again, like the world was like taken over by aliens and all of our literature was destroyed, and there's just little scraps of things in the desert and so forth. And these people, and they do this hilarious job of saying, that we now know about the Beatles, who were a really important group. And it was like, what was it? It was like John, Paul, like Scottie Pippen, and somebody else. Like, they didn't have like anybody, right? And the pictures that they had, and then it was funny. They were like picking on poor Ringo. It was like they have a picture, like question mark, like we're not sure who this is. And the way that they put their things together, and they said, well, the only new music they knew before then was opera, and they just went on this whole thing, and then they said, we've now finally reconstructed one of their songs, and it literally was like this weird combination of like A Day in the Life, the Cheers theme, and I forget what else, but it was really funny. But to the point that when you're trying to reconstruct things from scraps, and we use all of that as the evidence that we have, the hard evidence that we have, you're not necessarily getting a picture of what it was. So the other thing has to do with angels. Okay. Now, and honestly, I was probably very guilty of this for a long time as well. People who do angelic work, because that was the other thing that came up too, that people who are working, oh, you've gone over to working with angels, so now I guess you're all light and fluffy, right? Now, nobody said this to me, but that's something I kind of almost believe. When I would run in, that's because I've run into a lot of people who, when they do angel work, it's like, let's all talk about your guardian angel and how they protect you, and they have these kind of Victorian Christmas card versions of angels and stuff. And I don't think most occultists have that view of angels. But I'm always kind of like, angels are really just another type of intermediary. You know, I mean, in theory, demons are another type of intermediary too. It's just that they live in different locales, theoretically speaking. And angels are not, we always tend to think of them as always being benevolent and it's not, I'm not saying that they're evil. Again, we're getting into this dark and light thing. Angels are considered to be beings of light, of pure light, so it means everything they do is good. And since I've been working with angels, that's not necessarily my experience of them either. Because I work largely with Azrael, who is considered to be the angel of death. I talked a bit about this on my other live stream. The way I kind of understand it is, you know, the question becomes, because Azrael we see more mentioned in Islamic literature. Although he's mentioned in some later Judaic literature, Samael is often considered to be the angel of death. And so the question I always kind of had working with them was like, well, which one's the real angel of death? Please stand up. And the way I was come to understand it is Azrael has kind of said to me, oh, well, no, Samael is the angel of death. He's like, but, you know, Azrael deals more with some of these more, some of these larger scale transitions, or there's a certain amount of work that they kind of both do. And I feel like Azrael is more about transitioning people into kind of like whatever the next stage is. You know, if we think of the angel of death, it's the one who appears at your bed and, you know, it says, okay, it's time to go. But the kind of that transitioning process, that very, I always align Azrael to what we call the tower energy in tarot. You know, that you're running that sudden forceful breaking down of structure was what he seems to be involved with. And so dealing in angelic work does not necessarily mean you're dealing with, you know, little light fluffy creatures. It's like when I started working in Rouhani healing. And, you know, the first time and that's what I tell people when I present on it. I'm like, okay, when I would read about it, it's like, oh, it's the 51 angels of the pink ray, and they're all about opening your heart, and it just sounds so fluffy. And then you actually do Rouhani, and you're like, oh God, there's nothing fluffy about this. And a lot of people are not prepared for that. They come in thinking like this is going to be another version of massage therapy or something like that. And then it's like they wake up and they're like, oh my God, like all my childhood traumas are now in my face. Like it brings up all the stuff that's blocking your heart, quite literally. And it's doing that. Okay. Oh, okay. You want to get back to vulnerability? Well, look at all the crap that you haven't dealt with. Here it is, right in your face. That's been my experience with clients, and clients are like, whoa. I mean, and some people are ready for that. Some people are totally ready for that. But I always warn people who come in, I'm like, if you're somebody who's scared to death of this kind of stuff, and I'm only clinging to the light beings, I'm like, this might not be for you. Maybe you want to start with something, you know, a little less intense. But working with angels is very, very intense because they're a bit no nonsense. It's just kind of like, oh, okay, this is what you want to do, and then we do it. And so it's interesting that when somebody decides to do angelic work, that now it's kind of like somebody like myself, but it's not just me. This was something said to other people like, oh, well, now you've gone over to do light stuff instead of dark stuff. I mean, and I'm like, why? Because it doesn't seem as ooky spooky to you as, you know, dealing with underworld gods. I mean, angels deal with that too. I mean, it's not, there's this interesting conception that what is angelic is somehow lightweight, or somehow is, you know, and again, I think occult practitioners who have dealt like in Enochian work and stuff like that understand that that's not how it is. But angelic work is way, let's just say since I started doing it, I had done Enochian work about 10 years ago. I had experimented with it. And then, but really kind of, but again, I always kind of felt like also that I was not operating in that cultural system, because I always think of the angels as coming from kind of the Near Eastern, not only Judaic, but also probably Canaanite, Babylonian kind of context as well. And angels are not, as I've said, they're not, they're, how do I want to put it? They're not, having an angel appear at your bedside, okay? If you were going to have that kind of experience, people will talk about your angel appearing. That's not necessarily going to be an experience that is reassuring in any way. There is, if you read the book of Ezra, for instance, and they describe angels. I mean, the angels that are described there are, they have like a zillion eyes. They might have like the cherubs are said to have 4 heads, and some of them are animal heads, and some of them are human heads. Like the seraphs are literally beings of fire, and like I said, sometimes you're just having like a giant eyeball with like a zillion wings. I think what St. Paul used to call the thrones, which are actually called the Ophanim, which are basically the chariot wheels of whoever God is, and they're all covered with eyes. I mean, you're not talking about something more like what in the Matthew Gospel that Linus always quotes in Charlie Brown Christmas. The angel of the Lord came upon them, and they were sore afraid. Yeah, I mean, if that's what you saw, I would be sore afraid too, because they don't come across as these, just like with fairies. Fairies are not Tinkerbell type beings or creatures. Fairies can be absolutely terrifying. These are very, very powerful forces, and we always tend to talk about them in ways that make them sound like they're very light or they're very harmless. Not that they're harmful, okay? But they're not just these little fairy godmother type creatures. Depending on the connection you have to them. I mean, it's not that they can't be helpful to you or that they can't provide you with information, but that's not how they are. So anyway, I find it. I think the last comment that I kind of want to make is about spiritual paths and being on a spiritual path, because one of the things that we assume is that when somebody gets on a spiritual path, we might think of it in the way of somebody, say, maybe somebody who becomes a convert to something. Okay. Somebody who's lived a life that somebody would have called sinful, right? They've been in drugs or prostitution, or, they were on the street in a gang or something, something like that. And then that person finds Jesus, right? Usually in jail. They find Jesus, and then they're like, oh, I found Jesus and I'm saved now. Okay. Well, I think a lot of times when people think that one may move from something that we consider to be quote unquote dark to something that we consider to be light, that in some way, and of course people who are saved are sometimes not the people you want to talk to, because they are people who have merely repressed the guilt of, basically this has given them kind of an out for the guilt that they have about what they've done. So that gets pushed into the darkness. And then what happens is they look around and see everybody else who needs to be saved. And really, it's just they're looking at themselves again. But that part of themselves that they've disowned, now you're disassociated from it. Now disassociation's worse than actually dealing with it, So you have this notion that people who may start working in some of these realms, or may switch between realms, that there's something about them that it's like, or like you've... because we do hear about people like the Doreen Virtues of the world, who did all these goddess decks and angels decks and ascended masters things and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden she got scared and found religion and said, oh, throw all those away because they're all of the devil. And it's like, yeah, you got freaked because you bought into the dark light thing. You felt like, and sometimes people on the spiritual path think anything happens to them that's negative, either they're doing something wrong, because there's a spiritual shamers who are saying, well, what are you doing to make this happen? You need to be positive and thinking happy all the time, and you need to create positive intentions, and that's what they call spiritual bypassing, and it's very toxic. My point is a lot of people who work in so-called light work, and I'm not going to say, like, the vast majority of them, okay? I'm just going to say that there are people, and you can generally identify them, because if they're the ones who are always telling you, well, if you don't have abundance, it's your fault. If you're thinking things, that's because you're not thinking positively about things. They assume that what's cerebral fixes everything. Like, I can just think my way and intend my way to everything. Some magicians think that way too. Like, oh, I can just manifest what I want. Yeah, well, tell that to the consciousness you're wired to, that you're going to just be able to do that. There's a lot of unlearning, and then there's a lot of dark corners that have to be looked at before you get to a point where you can say, yeah, I'm in the flow of where I'm going, and it's just going to come naturally. So, but spiritual work is hard. It's hard work. Like I said, when I met my guru for the first time, most people who meet Amma for the first time are like, oh, they're all happy, and they're, I love and light, and they're walking around in white clothes and all this kind of stuff. And then I'm like, yeah, when you get to the serious work with her, you are just like, what the hell did I get into? It's really, it's hard work. It's hard work, and it's not nice. You go work at those programs, those people are not nice. They are not nice to you. And it'd be over nothing. You could be just there doing your work, and they'll just literally be like, you know what? F you. I hate you. For no reason. I've seen this, and not just me, I've seen this happen to other people too. They will just suddenly lash out at you in the most vile way, and you're like, whoa. And as one of my former bosses used to say, she'd be like, but I thought these people were supposed to be peaceful. They have religion. They're supposed to be peaceful. And I'm like, no, because once you get on that path, that's where the ugliness starts. Doing that kind of work is hard work. It's not, So that's why I'm saying, I'm just being honest about it. I'm like, it's dark work. It's dark work. You are going into those corners. You are finding all that stuff that you have disowned that needs to be reincorporated. All the things you're ashamed of. All the things you feel guilty about. All the things that you feel you have no business being as a human being. But you are. That's who you are. And your connection to nature, which of course is filthy and dirty, and and we don't want anything to do with that either. It didn't make me perfectly happy and fulfill all my dreams, so now it's suspect, I think there's just kind of a reality check that needs to be. So to me, I'm like, that's why that's why the school is actually a school of the feminine too, because the feminine way of doing things, passivity, allowing things to come to you, saying, no, I don't always need to take action. Yeah, I can listen to my intuition. That's the way of doing things. Feeling my way out in my community does matter. It's not just what I can grab for myself. It's not just what I see in front of my face. See, that's a way of thinking. These are all kind of the meta ways of thinking that we need to say, okay, this is where we need to kind of go in and do some of the work here and figure out a new way. So that's why I focus on the feminine, and that's why I focus on the dark, because I'm like, you don't need something that's just going to, we want it to be like a placebo pill, or not even a placebo, I shouldn't say that. More like just a pill that's going to fix everything. This is going to magically make all my problems go away, and now I'm going to be happy and peaceful. You're not going to achieve anything like that, if that's even exactly what the kind of point things are. But let's just say that that's what you want, is just to feel in peace, to feel in balance, to just do what you want in your life. You don't get there unless you work through that kind of a space. If you try to disown that kind of space and say, no, I only want happy things. Maybe we only want happy things, but you don't get there by doing that. You get there by dealing with whatever comes your way, really. And accepting that the world is not lopsidedly just, because often when we say that the world is good, whose version of good are we talking about anyway? It's a subjective term. What's good for, as my guru had said, she said, what's bad for the family, when there's a death in the family, it's bad for the family and good for the undertaker, right? It's, who's it good for, So anyway, that's my little spiel for today. But I just, the dark light discussion, I know I've done some version of this that I've talked about before, but I felt like, I need to, let me just bring this up again, being it's a topic that's come up again recently in some of the work that I'm doing. And I think it's relevant to the new school that I'm putting out. And it's always good for people who are kind of new to Chthonia and don't quite get what I'm doing. to kind of see a little bit of what I'm talking about when, like, let's get back to the backdrops, let's get back to the associations. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining me. There's quite a few of you and a couple of surprise people who I haven't seen in a while, which is really great. And so I hope all of you have a wonderful week. Check out the podcast this week on Nick Nevin, and I will be back next Monday as usual. So take care. Have a great rest of your day.